32 verses. But we'll see. Chapter's 19, right? That's at least what the notes say. All right, so as we know, maybe. There we go. This takes place in the 40 years wandering. I think I stole it out of the note from the last time, right? So the Israelites are camped around the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. The Lord told them, turn around. You remember that? Go back to the Red Sea. And they haven't done that yet. They're still kind of camped out there. And today we learn about the law of the red heifer. A lot of people's probably heard about that, right? Well, I hate to disappoint you, but it's not a prophecy. For those that thought it was a prophecy, it's not. It is a law, though. So we're going to talk about it. But according to rabbinical tradition, there have been 9 red heifers sacrificed since the time of Moses. So since the destruction of the second temple, no red heifers have been slaughtered since then. And this so-called prophecy, if you will, kind of came about because of a rabbi that was very popular during the 1100s. He taught that the 10th red heifer would be sacrificed by the Messiah himself. But there's no biblical teaching for that, but that's how that kind of became popular. Now, you guys recall the temple? Yep. Yep.
I've always heard that
Mm-hmm.
they were looking for the red heifer because they were going to build a temple.
We will talk about why they need the red heifer, but it is not a prophecy that they have to have it. Yes. Yep. And
Actually a cow?
it's actually a cow. We're going to talk about that too, what really the red heifer is. Yep, we're going to get into it, right? But you guys recall the Temple Institute, the group that's trying to rebuild the temple, right? We talked about it earlier in the study. They're advocating for the construction of the third temple, right? And the reports that they have 5 flawless red heifers from Texas has arrived on September 15th of 2022. So they actually have them, and they are now breeding them in Israel. Yep. We'll talk about what a perfect red heifer has to be here in a little bit too, right? To make it according to the law. But many people view this fulfillment of prophecy, even though it's not, because the acquisition of a red heifer is a major step towards rebuilding the temple, right? So there is some things they need to do, or they require a red heifer for, and we'll talk about that tonight.
So this group of people are breeding the cows and just keeping them there just so they'll be ready when...
So they'll be ready. Yep, so they will have some. But there's... Yeah, they're Jewish. Yes, they're Orthodox Jews. Yes. Yes. Yep. Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. But this is a very unusual law in the fact that it was given out in the wilderness, right? Not during Exodus, where a lot of the laws were given, right? And it's not even in Leviticus where the rest of the laws were really given. So this one's out as they're borderline next to the promised land before they have to go back and wander for the next 38 years. It's also a special formula or a recipe of ashes and water for ritualistic cleansing of the people who are defiled by touching a dead body or being around a dead body. So why is that an issue? Anybody think? Why is this going to be an issue for them? And why did God have to do this? There's going to be a lot of dead people, right? Right? It becomes an issue, and it's a singular issue for this generation, because God promised that generation will die in the wilderness, right? They couldn't go into the promised land. So, because the younger generation is over the next 38-ish years, we'll watch this next generation die off, and there will be so much death that God had to have a way to cleanse them. So if you recall, chapter 17, we did the math. Anybody remember how many funerals on an average day?
I cheated you. Look at 85.
85, yes, 85. It's a constant reminder of God's judgment on that generation to the younger generation, right?
What was the size of the Jewish nation at this
2 to 3 million-ish. I mean, the numbers we don't know exactly, but we know how many males there were of a certain age, right? We went through that. So you can kind of guesstimate. But they average about 2 million is what they say. It's a large group to wander through the wilderness. So that's really what this chapter is all about. We're going to talk about the red heifer and the cleansing ritual or ceremony, right? All right, verse 1 through 3. Who wants to read it? All right.
I didn't bring my glasses, so I'm going to get my reading.
And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, This is according to the law which the Lord hath commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer without spot, wherein is no blemish, and a horn which never came yet. And he shall give her unto Eleazar the priest, that he may bring her forth without the camp, and one shall slay her before his face.
Amen. So the first 3 verses, we find out a lot of interesting facts about this red heifer. Right out of the gate, Moses is back talking to, or God is talking back to Moses and Aaron. Excuse me on that. Right? Last week he was only talking to Aaron. And the Mosaic law that we just heard is speaking of a red heifer without defect or blemish, right? And it's never been yoked. So that means it hasn't been used for any work yet, right? So what is a red heifer? It's a female cow, and you know what that represents? Why it's a female? The bearer of life, right? The female bears life, right? The red in collar, what do you think that represents?
Blood of Christ.
Blood of Christ, the blood of life, right? And according to the rabbinical tradition, says that it must be perfect in redness. That's a red hue over the whole animal. No white, no black hairs. More than 2 and it's disqualified. That also includes the hooves and the horns. So they have to have a red hue, complete red hue, according to their tradition. And it would state that the animal had to be between 2 and 3 years of age. So that's, again, in their tradition, not necessarily biblical fact, right? So what's significant about this already? Can anybody guess? It's female, right? It's the only female offering, right? It's the only sacrifice where a collar is specified. And what else?
It hasn't been yoked.
That's true point 2. Hasn't been worked. But it had to be done outside of the camp, right? It did say that in verse 3. Had to be taken outside the camp. Right? Now you're catching on. Yep, now you're catching on. So Christ was crucified outside the gate, right, of Jerusalem. So the red heifer also is a symbol of Christ, our perfect sacrificial one, the Messiah, Christ himself, right? The red heifer is killed outside the camp, just like Christ is crucified right outside the city of Jerusalem, outside the Damascus gate, right? So you're starting to see the symbolism built here on this red heifer. All right, 4 through 6. Oh,
You say they're breeding them. Will they breed true? Because so many heifers are, they call them pure blood, but they're only about 95, maybe 90% pure.
They will-
because There's so many
yes.
inbreeding genes over.
They will only keep the true ones. Any of the other ones will be moved away. Modified? I can't answer that. There's a couple. I did do some research on this. I was going to bring this into it, but I didn't do it. There's a few other farms. There's one in Oklahoma as well doing the exact same thing, red heifers. So they're specifically breeding cows together to create that hue. And they have done it successfully now. So now they've handed that over to the Temple Institute or one of the farms that organization is helping run. That's why they moved them there. That's why they moved them there and they breed them. Yep. All right. Who wants to?
Later, the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offal shall be burned.
Mm-hmm. That's its innards.
And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and cast them into the midst of the fire, burning the heifer.
Yep. So notice you had to put some stuff inside the fire or in with the heifer, right? So why cedar wood? Anybody have a clue?
What?
Why cedar wood?
The smell of aromatic.
It does smell unique, but it's more about the properties of the cedar. The wood that they use, woodworkers in here would probably know that the wood is very resilient, very strong, it can take a beating. Yeah, it's rot resistant. You would use it for fencing or decks or, things of that nature. So it's heavy, it's strong, right? It's a great outside project wood, I guess. Now, what else did it call for?
Hyssop.
Yeah, hyssop or hyssop, however you want to say that. Do you know what that symbolized in those days?
On the Passover, did they take a brush of hyssop and spread the
Yeah,
blood
we're going to talk
over
about
the
that.
mantle?
We're going to talk about that. Good call, Tom. Yeah, well, it's basically pure from corruption, but you're right on the actual definition is pure from corruption. Is what no corruption, purity. Purity. So I want to take you back to Passover, right? We just talked about that. Tom he could be up here teaching this for us, right? But what did Moses instruct the Israelites to do, right? He said, paint the door, right? And you had to paint it with a hyssop plant. That's what they used, right? Speaks of the purgination or the cleansing, as Julie talked about. Psalm 51:7 says, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. So there's some biblical proof of the cleansing, right? Even when Jesus was on the cross, and they gave him something to drink, right? They gave him that vinegar water. What did they use? That was Psalm 51:7. In John, I'll give you the scripture for the Jesus, right? In John 19:29, a vessel full of vinegar was set, and they filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a hyssop and put it to his mouth. So they used the hyssop yet again there, right? It's a common plant in that era in the Middle East. Today, they actually have a spice called za'atar. I think that's how you say it. It's Zaatar, if you want to know how it's spelled, but za'atar is what I'm going to say. And that's actually the hyssop plant, the leaves cut up, and they use it as a spice. So, now, the scarlet speaks of what? Blood or life, right? So yet again, the female heifer, she's the bearer of life. The red heifer, the blood, is the sustenance of life, right? So as we discussed in the beginning of this study, We now have a couple farms in the USA that are breeding these animals for Israel, right? And Israel is now taking on some of that breeding themselves, right? That group has examined these cows, right, these heifers, and they called them legitimate. So we talked about, they couldn't have more than 2 white hairs. So or black hairs for that matter. So according to Hebrew tradition, the very first heifer was burned and used in a ceremony that we're about to read about, right? So this will be the first one that we're going to read about. There was 8 more since then, right? But after they used most of the ashes up, they would save a small portion of them. Anybody know why? They wouldn't use all the ashes up. They would save some.
For cleansing?
According to their tradition, the rest of the ashes are used for the cleansing. What they saved, according to the tradition, was to dump back into the next heifer's fire and mix it around with those ashes, so you would always have a piece of the original heifer that was sacrificed. And they do that every time they burnt a red heifer. Right? So when the Jerusalem was built, it was eventually destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And according to these rabbinical writings, the priest would come into the priesthood. When a new priest would come, the ashes of the red heifer were put into water, and they purified the priesthood, or that priest, with that purification water. This is why they need the red heifer today. In order to cleanse the priesthood for the temple, they need the red heifer. They need the ashes for this cleansing, right? So that Temple Institute group of they're Orthodox Jews, right? They are sworn to rebuild this temple, and part of that is they need this red heifer.
Okay, when the ashes from the red heifer, was
Mhm.
it like covered in gold and
Mm-hmm.
or was it just so many ashes?
It was burnt all the way up.
That had to be like really strong fire.
Yeah, it'd be hot, very hot fire. That's why they put cedar in there. That's why they built it hot. Yep. Now, this group that we're talking about, this temple group, right? They've already we talked about. They already have the priests, right? They have priests trained today, right? And we've talked about they have the menorah, they have everything else, but the one big problem is the red heifer. Where are the ashes today that were left? They according to tradition, they're going to need those ashes, right?
Is there any ceremony they can do to start it again? I mean, dedication or a consecration, something, to start it?
No, not that I know of. Not that I could find either, right?
Who's to say that the Jewish people someone hasn't kept them for all those years under protection?
So,
Because we still have the tribe of Levi, right?
yep.
So,
So here's the research that I found, right? Walking through this. There was a archaeologist guy in Texas, right? I don't recall his name, but he believed he found it, right where they were. He believed that the ashes of the red heifer from the second period of that temple of that time are in a cave in Qumran where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and it should be in a copper vessel, right? He believes that's where they were. He can't prove it, but that's where he believes he's traced it to.
In today's world, I know it's secular, but DNA is still kept in the ashes, so they might be able to test it.
Yeah, but I don't know what they would test it against. They'd have to have the original to test it against, so there's that. But a noted Jewish archaeologist named Asher Kaufman has done many digs around that area, right? And has written many books. He thinks he knows exactly where they are. And he believes they're on the Mount of Olives where the original red heifers were sacrificed to begin with, or some of the original ones were sacrificed, right? During the temple period.
Did they say what breed of cow
No,
it was?
just red. No breed information was given. And I couldn't figure that out. That mount is called the Mount of Atonement, right? And the priests would be sprinkling blood 7 times towards the west, towards the temple, when they did that burn. And then he believes they would have put some in a cistern on the Mount of Olives. And one would think, well, we could just go find it. The problem today is where he says it is, there's a Greek Orthodox church there on that exact site. And the bishop and the leaders of that church won't let any excavation go on their grounds. So that's where he believes it's at. I guess time will tell, right? Those are the only 2 I could find. Right? The Orthodox do not. No, they believe he's a prophet, but they do not believe he's the Son or the Messiah. Yep. 7 through 12. Who wants to read that? This is the actual ceremony.
I will.
All right.
Then the priest shall wash his clothes, and he shall bathe his flesh in water, and afterward he shall come into the camp, and the priest shall be unclean until the even. And he that burneth her shall wash his clothes in water, and bathe his flesh in water, and shall be unclean until the even. And a man that is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and lay them up without the camp, in a clean place, and it shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for a water of separation. It is a purification for sin. And he that gathereth the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until the even. And it shall be unto the children of Israel, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among them, for a statute forever. He that toucheth the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with it on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day he shall be clean. But if he purify not himself the 3rd day, then the 7th day he shall not be clean.
Well, we got a good bit of info there, didn't we? Yep. So the priest had to bathe because he was unclean, right? Because he dealt with the death. He actually slaughtered the animal, right? Then the person that burned it also was unclean, right? And then a clean man had to go gather up all the ashes, but guess what happened to him? Then he was unclean. And all of those had to bathe and wash their clothes, and they were unclean until evening, because that starts the new day according to the Jewish tradition, right? Right? That's what, yeah, it should say evening. Say what? Yeah, like sunset. Yeah. Yep.
I was gonna say it's not the same that we do today.
Yep. Oh, I guess I'm going too far there. There we go. But there is an important principle here. God gave a prescription on how he wants to be approached, right? What is clean and what is not clean. So you can only get clean the way God says to. So some Jewish guy can't say, I don't want to do that. He's still ceremonially unclean, right? So, all right, verse 13. Just one.
Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean because of the water of purification that is not sprinkled on him. His uncleanliness is still on him.
Yep. So, this being defiled because of death is an Old Testament issue, right? You need purification. Water, this special recipe to become clean, right? You need that recipe of the water, the red heifer, the hyssop, the the cedar wood, all that mixed together. So the female was the bearer of life, right? Which symbolically puts, brings life, right? She brings life. She's the bearer of life. Places life being perpetuated. Out of death comes life. That's what you're seeing here, right? Out of death will come life, and out of life will continue and must be sacrificed for our life to continue. So you see the sacrifice happen. It's all that symbolism of Christ, is it not? Right? So how would this apply to the New Testament believer? Yeah. So this is a special cleansing offering, right? For death. But don't we have to die to ourselves too to be cleansed? Right? So how did this apply to us? Jesus died for us once and for all, right? When he hung on the cross, he said it was finished. You can't add anything to that. Right? It's what he did. Right? It's done. I just want to point out something else here, that Jesus at the Last Supper did some cleansing too to his disciples. Anybody recall what it is? He washed their feet, right? Now, why do you think that's important?
That made it humble, or showed that he was humble.
Yeah. Well, it showed that he was humble, that's for sure. We also see in that passage, Peter said, "Don't wash me." I think Peter, I got it right here. Here, I'll read this for you so you can get the text. It's John 13, 4 through 10. I'll read it real quick. He rose up from supper, laid aside his garments, and took the towel and girded himself. And after he poured water into the basin, he began to wash the feet of the disciples and wipe them with the towel which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, "Lord, don't wash my feet." Right? Jesus answered him and said, "You do not know what I do now, but you shall know hereafter." And Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no part of me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and head too." Right? So he wanted a shower. Right? Right? And Jesus told him, "He who is bathed has no need except to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, or everywhere else," right? But are you clean? Not all of you. So he's also saying one of them there is not clean. Yep, we know that's Judas. But what you see, we walk through this world, we get our feet dirty, do we not? Right? And we're cleansed by the blood of Christ for all. But you walk daily, you get your feet dirty. The imagery of Christ used here was the ancient bathhouse. So, not that you need to know all of it, but you go into the ritual bathing, you walk, you got clean, you then put your sandals on, and you walk home. What happened? Your feet got dirty. This is what Christ was picturing when he was talking about that. So it's important that as soon as you get back in the house, your servant or yourself cleaned your feet, right? That's what he's saying. So we can kind of look at this as we need to wash our feet. That's the cleansing.
Just thinking, see, that kind of symbolizes if you don't have the covering of Christ.
Exactly. Yep. If you don't have the covering of Christ, you'll be dirty, so to speak. All right, 14 and 15. Who wants to read it? Go ahead, Tom.
This is a law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters a tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days. Is that 15? And every open container without a lid fastened on it will be unclean.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So the Lord here is saying if anyone dies in your tent, or you walk into a tent and somebody's dead, you are now unclean. Not only that, But anything without a lid in there is also unclean. The water in the jug, that's all unclean. The only way to clean it, we're going to find out here in a little bit what they have to do. Right? But I kind of looked at this as like God's container law, right? Open container law. If the water in that vessel or whatever's in that vessel doesn't have a lid on it, it's also defiled. It's pretty amazing, is it not? All right.
You know, I
Oh.
don't know if this is act God is just saying something about it, a container. They can boil down just the same as somebody drives down the road. If it's not uncovered, you won't be judged, but if it's open.
Yep. Yep. You'll be judged, right? Yep. All right, verse 16 through 19. Who's got it? All right, Gary.
And whosoever touches one that is slain with the sword in the open field, or a dead body, or a bone of a man, or a grave shall be unclean 7 days. And for an unclean person they shall take of the ashes of the burnt heifer, purification for sin, and running water shall be put thereto in a vessel. And a clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in water and sprinkle it upon the tent, and upon all the vessels, and upon the persons that were there, and upon him that touched a bone, or one slain, or one dead, or a grave. And the clean person shall sprinkle upon the unclean on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, and on the 7th day he shall purify himself, and wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean that evening.
Yeah. So I suppose the younger generation could just close up everything when they leave their tent so they didn't have this problem, right? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But there may also be a principle here, and Gary kind of landed on it just a minute ago, right? That an open container is defiled, but a closed one is protected, right? So have you ever met a person that says, hey, you got to be more open-minded? Well, think about that, right? We all have, right?
Sometimes and other times it's not.
But think about this. The Bible says we're vessels or clay pots, does it not?
You put on the helm of, is it discernment? No. The helmet that you're supposed, the armor of God.
Yeah, the
helmet.
helmet of salvation. Yep. But if the vessel is open, if you're the vessel and we have an open mind, will we not be defiled? Because we're open to the wickedness of the world. We're not sealed or closed by Christ, are we not? So think about that. Yeah, want to think outside the box. Yeah.
It says to test everything you're told.
Mm-hmm. Through the scriptures.
You don't just take it. Oh, he said this. Okay.
Yep.
No, it doesn't go
Mm-hmm.
that way. It's to be tested through the Bible.
Yes. So I'm glad I'm closed-minded to Christ now, right? It's the only way.
Better say with Christ. That
Yep.
sounds a little.
Yeah, closed-minded with Christ. Okay, I got it. Very good catch there, right? But could we not always say at one time we had our minds open, Christ found his way in, and then sealed us shut, right? I guess that's what I'm getting at. All right, finish it up with 20 through 22.
It shall be a perpetual statute for them. He who sprinkles water of purification shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water of purification shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening.
Well, there we go.
I got a question.
Yep.
And it's semantics, but if the clothes are unclean and the woman's washing them,
She's unclean now
is
too.
she unclean too?
Yeah.
Wait a minute,
She has to go through the ritual as well.
Playing word games.
Yeah.
But no, wait a minute, somebody's gotta purify it, but
Yep.
if you touch it, you're impure.
So a clean person would go through the washing, the cleansing process for the unclean. They would bring the water to them and sprinkle it on, right? That's what we just learned. So the Bible doesn't tell us if a man, this is an interesting fact, and we kind of glossed over this, but the Bible doesn't tell us if the man who didn't purify himself, that was cut off, was he killed, as in previous that we learned? The Bible doesn't tell us that. It just says he's cut off or put out. But either way, that's pretty much a travesty, right?
How long did these rituals, I mean, by the time Jesus was born, they weren't still practicing.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
Did that stop? When did this?
70 AD when they destroyed the temple.
When did it stop?
70 AD when they destroyed the temple.
Well, they got a lot to make up for.
When it talks about the man that doesn't purify himself and is cut off, I
Mhm.
think about like people that don't accept Christ in their heart, he casts them out.
Yep. He will put them out like wheat, right? Sift them like wheat, right? Mm. So the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron at the end here, right? Yet again, right? And Moses, he was a good mediator of the covenant, right? I mean, if you think about it, the people complained all the time, and Moses got in the way, did he not? Moses said, "No, Lord," and he stood in the gap, right? But he wasn't good enough to be the ultimate mediator, right? We're going to see that this is pointing to Christ as well. And Aaron, the same thing. God validated him. He chose him and his family. But even Aaron and all the sacrifices he made couldn't atone for their sin permanently, could it? Right? In Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews 9:11 through, I forget what I went through, 15, 9:11 says, "But Christ had become the high priest of good things to come by, but greater and more than the perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, but to say, not of this building, nor his blood of goats and calves, but his own blood he entered once and for all into the holies, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For the blood of bulls and goats and ashes of the heifer, sprinkling the unclean sanctities to purify the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, through the eternal Spirit, offered himself without a spot to God, purged conscience from the dead, works to serve the living God." Verse 15, "And the cause he is the mediator of the new covenant, so that by means of death, for the redemption of of the transgressions that are under the first covenant, those who are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance." It's pretty impressive. Basically, the writer of Hebrews is saying, hey, none of that was good enough, and Christ was the only one that was, right? So all the sacrifices of the Old Testament were shadows to the cross, were they not? Pointing to Jesus. The blood was needed. Animals were killed and sprinkled. Their blood was sprinkled to atone for sins, right? But they could never wash them away. They could never blot them out. So I got a question for you. How many wounds were on Jesus?
I don't know if his feet were together or each individual
Mhm.
was there. But 1, 2, 3, 4, could be 5.
Try 7. 7. 2 hands, 2 feet, crown of thorns, spear in his side, and his back whipped. 7. 7 wounds. 7 times the priests all speak in Hebrews, right? The writer of Hebrews says it 7 times. That the better the covenant would be better the mediator, better the priest, better upon Jesus' blood. There's 7 mentions there as well. Pretty interesting, at least I think. All right. Oh, application for today. So, washing the water for a purpose of spiritual purification was common amongst the Jews in the Old Testament, right? The Jews created these traditions around hand washing for ceremony cleaning, right? We do it today. We wash our hands before we eat, right? So we make ourselves clean. It isn't surprising that Jesus carried this imaging forward with baptism either, is it? Think about it. You're cleansed. You go down, you come back up, you're cleansed, you're anew, right? Jesus told Nicodemus, right? Jesus told Nicodemus, a person must be born again of water and of the Spirit if he wants to enter the kingdom. And what about Ananias? When he was about to be baptized, Paul said, now why do you wait? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling in his name. Do it immediately. Right? All right. Who's got your questions? What is a red heifer? Did we learn that? Female cow represents the bearer of life, red in color and hue, right? Yep. Why was that significant? Well, it's the only female, right? It's the only sacrifice that was specified. It also had to be sacrificed away from the tabernacle, or it was a symbol of Christ. Right? What does hyssop symbolize? Purity, yep. Pure from corruption. What did the ceremony clean the person from? The defilement of death, touching a dead body. That's what this was for. This one didn't atone for sin. No, this only cleansed a dead person. All right. How would you apply the New Testament to a New Testament believer? Jesus died for us once and for all, but he did tell us we need to wash our feet from time to time. And how many wounds were on Christ, Tom? 7. Yeah, look at you over there. Yeah.
Got a question.
Yep.
The scourging of his back
Mm-hmm.
with the whip.
Yep.
Would that count as a wound?
Yes. Or at least
I mean,
That's
multiple times, but just book
a
it
wound.
together, call it one
Yeah.
wound.
They called it one wound, according to the research.
What, 27? That's a heck of a number.
It's 30 minus 1, right? I think, or 50 minus 1 or
30 might
something.
kill a
30,
person, but 29
30 would kill a person and 1 would, and save 1. Right? All right, any other questions? It's good discussion. Yes. Yep. Yep. For the healing of the body. Yep. By his stripes we are healed. Yep. Yeah, they came from, the ones they have today came from Texas. I don't know what breed of cow they are. I do not know that answer.
They did say that they were artificially inseminated, like they had to.
They bred them specifically. Yes.
They did it artificially, so
Yeah.
is that not a cow?
I can't answer that question. I am not God. I'm just saying they have red heifers now.
Well, I would think some,
Yep.
I would think that somewhere,
if it's
Yep.
read true, it would count.
yeah, if they
Yep.
read naturally, I just don't see the science, they put science behind creating a cow.
God created science too, so maybe, I mean, he runs the hands of the surgeon, right? We want him to be on that, so I'm not going to take it away from, I'm not going to say no. How about that? Anybody else? Any other question?
Counterfeit stuff, like Julie pointed out to me.
I know. I'd watch. They're not cloning them or 3D printing them or whatever. They are actually genetically altering them. Maybe. I don't know. Any other questions?